Imagine for a moment the absolute absurdity of this situation. You are declared dead by your own government. Your family holds a funeral mass. Your priest prays for your soul. The local newspaper publishes your obituary. Friends and neighbors fill the church pews, mourning what they believe is your loss. But you're not dead. You're sitting in a German interrogation room, watching your captors beat another American prisoner unconscious. This isn't the opening to some Hollywood spy thriller. This is the true story of Joseph Beyrle, the only American soldier in the entire history of the Second World War to serve in combat with both the United States Army and the Soviet Red Army. Let me take you back to the beginning, because understanding who Joseph Beyrle was helps us understand why he would survive what no one thought survivable. A child of depression, a man of grit. Joseph Robert Beyrle was born on August 25, 1923, in Muskegon, Michigan. His grandparents had immigrated from Bavaria in the 1800s. Young Joe was the third of 7 children. By the time he was old enough to understand the world, it was collapsing around him. The Great Depression hit like a sledgehammer. October 1929, the stock market crashed. His father, a factory worker who had done nothing wrong, lost his job. The Beyrle family was evicted from their home. They moved in with Joe's grandmother. Some of Joe's earliest memories were of standing in government food lines with his father, waiting for handouts. Government cheese, government bread. The bare minimum required to survive. He watched his younger sister die of scarlet fever, a tragedy that his father would carry to his grave. The experience hardened young Joe. It showed him what it meant to struggle, to be tested, to survive. But when Pearl Harbor was attacked, Joe was a high school senior. He had been offered a full-ride baseball scholarship to Notre Dame, a golden opportunity that would have changed his entire life. But Joe wasn't most young men. He watched the attack and saw a nation in peril. He turned down the scholarship and enlisted in the United States Army. He volunteered for the Paratroopers, the most demanding and dangerous branch of service. He was sent to Camp Toccoa, Georgia. The training was brutal. Paratroopers had to run up Currahee Mountain, 3 miles up and 3 miles down, carrying heavy equipment. They had to learn to jump from aircraft at terrifying altitudes. And Joe Beyrle loved it. He discovered he had a gift for jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. He was so good at it, so fearless, that he earned the nickname Jumpin' Joe. He had more jumps than anyone else in the 101st Airborne Division. He was so confident that he would sometimes pose as other paratroopers and make jumps for them for a fee of $5 each. He was assigned to the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division, the famous Screaming Eagles. They specialized in radio communications and demolitions. In April and May of 1944, he was selected for clandestine missions. He was flown into German-occupied France twice, delivering gold to the French resistance. These were secret operations, black ops. He parachuted behind enemy lines, delivered the gold, and somehow made it back both times. But these 2 missions were merely the dress rehearsal for what was to come. The jump into hell, D-Day over Normandy. Operation Overlord was the largest amphibious invasion in human history. More than 5,000 ships, more than 150,000 soldiers preparing to land on hostile beaches, more than 6,200 aircraft. Before the invasion fleet hit the beaches, the paratroopers had to go in first, the tip of the spear. More than 13,000 American paratroopers from the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions were loaded into transport aircraft. At 23 minutes past midnight on June 6, 1944, Sergeant Joseph Beyrle stood in the open door of a C-47 Skytrain transport aircraft. Tracer fire was climbing toward his plane from 300 feet below. The anti-aircraft guns had found them. The sky was exploding with flak. The noise was absolutely deafening. The smell of cordite filled the aircraft. German anti-aircraft batteries had already shredded 6 transports in the formation. By dawn, over 1,200 American paratroopers would be dead, wounded, or captured. The 101st Airborne was jumping into what would later be called a kill zone. Beyrle's plane was flying too low and too fast. The green light, the signal to jump, never came. Instead, flak punched through the fuselage. The pilot made the only decision he could: get away from the anti-aircraft positions. He banked hard, and as the aircraft tilted, Beyrle went out the door at 360 feet. Standard jump. Altitude was 1,200 feet. That meant his parachute had 4 seconds to open before he hit the ground. It opened. He crashed through the roof of the Church of Saint-Côme-du-Mont and landed in the cemetery beside it. His stick, the group of paratroopers assigned to jump together, was scattered across 15 miles of Norman farmland. Beyrle was alone, armed with a Thompson submachine gun and explosives, with a mission to destroy a power station. Joseph Beyrle did not hide. He spent 3 days conducting solo sabotage operations behind enemy lines. He destroyed the power station. He cut communication lines. He moved through German-occupied territory like a ghost with a demolition kit. On June 9th, crawling through a hedgerow near Carentan, he stumbled directly into a German machine gun nest. 4 soldiers, 4 guns, 0 options. He was captured. The Germans noticed something immediately about this American prisoner. They noticed his dog tags. They noticed his surname, Beyrle, a German name. His grandparents had immigrated from Bavaria. To the German interrogators, this wasn't just an American enemy soldier. This was a traitor to his blood. They took his identification tags and gave them to a German infiltrator spy. That spy was killed 3 weeks later. American soldiers found the body. They found the dog tags. They found the name Joseph Beyrle. On June 10, 1944, the United States War Department officially declared Sergeant Joseph Beyrle killed in action on French soil. A telegram arrived at his parents' home in Muskegon. His mother collapsed. His father learned that his son was dead in Normandy. The parish priest scheduled a funeral mass. The local newspaper printed an obituary. Friends and neighbors filled the church pews. They prayed for the soul of Joseph Beyrle, killed in the liberation of France. But Joseph Beyrle was not dead. He was sitting in a German interrogation room 400 meters to the east, watching. His captors beat another American prisoner unconscious. He was the prisoner no one knew existed. 7 months of captivity and torture. The German military prison system operated on a simple principle. Troublemakers went east. Joseph Beyrle became a troublemaker immediately. Over the next 7 months, he would be transferred through 7 different German prisons. His first escape attempt came in July 1944. A column of prisoners was being marched when American fighter bombers appeared overhead. The guards scattered. In the confusion, Beyrle ran. He made it 16 hours before German patrols caught him. They beat him with rifle butts and added his name to a list: escape risk, transfer east. By October 1944, he had passed through 4 different camps. He had learned to bribe guards with cigarettes, to trade information for food, to survive on watered soup and moldy bread. He had also learned that the Soviet army was advancing through Poland. If he could reach the Eastern Front, he might find allies. In October, he and 2 other prisoners boarded a train they thought was heading east toward Poland. The train went west, directly into Berlin. German railway workers discovered them and called the Gestapo. What followed was the worst 10 days of Joseph Beyrle's entire ordeal. The Gestapo did not recognize prisoners of war. They saw 3 men in American uniforms and drew an obvious conclusion: spies. The interrogations began immediately. Beyrle was stripped naked. He was beaten. He was hung by his arms with his hands twisted backward behind his body until both shoulders were dislocated. His interrogators used whips and clubs and rifle butts. They demanded information. Beyrle gave them nothing. The beatings continued for over a week. Sleep deprivation, starvation, mock executions. On the 10th day, they lined Beyrle against a wall. A firing squad assembled. The bullets never came. Wehrmacht officers arrived with paperwork. The German military had tracked the prisoners. They had documentation proving these men were captured soldiers, not spies. The Gestapo had no jurisdiction. The argument lasted 3 hours. The army won. Beyrle was transferred to military custody. In late December 1944, they transferred him to Stalag 3C in occupied Poland. 12,000 prisoners, barbed wire, guard towers, machine guns. But the prisoners had information the Germans did not want them to have. Soviet artillery was audible to the east. The Red Army was coming. Beyrle began planning his third escape attempt. This time, he would go east. Escape and the Red Army. The escape came in the first week of January 1945. Beyrle had been saving cigarettes for weeks, building a currency that worked better than money. He bribed a guard to look away. He slipped through a gap in the wire. For 2 weeks, he moved through occupied Poland in winter. Temperatures dropped below zero. He had no map, no compass. He navigated by sound, following the rumble of Soviet artillery. His body was failing. The Gestapo torture had left permanent damage. His shoulders ached from the dislocations. His ribs had never healed properly. He was malnourished, frostbitten, running on willpower and rage. In mid-January, he saw them. Soviet T-34s, their hulls painted white for winter camouflage. Beyrle had exactly one chance. Soviet soldiers shot first and asked questions. Never. He raised his hands above his head. In one hand, he held a pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes. American cigarettes. He walked toward the tank slowly, shouting the only Russian words he knew. "Amerikansky tovarish! American comrade!" The tankers did not shoot. They surrounded him with rifles raised. A commissar arrived who spoke broken English. Beyrle explained. American paratrooper, prisoner of war, escaped from German camp, wanted to fight. The commissar said no. Regulations required evacuation through proper channels. Beyrle refused, had not survived 7 months of captivity and torture, to sit in another camp. He wanted a weapon. He wanted revenge. The battalion commander arrived to investigate. The officer who appeared was unlike anyone Beyrle had expected. Her name was Alexandra Samusenko. She was 23 years old. She was the only female tank commander in the 1st Guards Tank Army. She had destroyed 3 German Tiger tanks at the Battle of Kursk 18 months earlier. She had lost her husband to the Germans. She had lost her entire family. She understood revenge. Samusenko overruled the commissar. The American would stay. He would fight. The Soviets issued Beyrle a uniform, a PPSH-41 submachine gun, and an assignment. He would serve as infantry support for one of the battalion's tanks. The tank was American-made, an M4 Sherman, provided through the Lend-Lease program. Sergeant Joseph Beyrle, 101st Airborne Division, United States Army, was now a soldier of the Soviet Red Army, riding an American tank toward Germany. No American had ever done this before. None would ever do it again. Fighting on the Eastern Front was nothing like Normandy. There were no rules. The war between Germany and the Soviet Union had killed 20 million people in 4 years. Villages burned. Entire populations vanished. Neither side expected mercy. Beyrle adapted quickly. His demolitions training made him valuable. Soviet sappers showed him their techniques and he showed them his. Within days, he was placing explosive charges on German bunkers alongside men who spoke no English. The battalion pushed west through January 1945. Frozen fields littered with burned-out vehicles. Towns reduced to rubble. Bodies stacked along roadsides. German and Soviet and civilian. Too many to bury. Beyrle rode on the back of his Sherman tank, gripping the PPSH-41, scanning the tree lines for ambushes. The Soviet soldiers accepted him with surprising speed. They did not care about politics or nationality. They cared about whether a man could fight. Beyrle proved himself in the first engagement. He did not run. He did not freeze. He moved forward with the assault wave and used his submachine gun the same way he had used his Thompson in Normandy. The Russians called him their American. They shared their rations with him. Black bread, buckwheat porridge, vodka that burned like gasoline. At night, around fires built in the ruins of German farmhouses, they toasted to Stalin and Roosevelt. Beyrle learned fragments of Russian, enough to understand orders, enough to warn comrades of incoming fire. By late January, the battalion had advanced nearly 100 kilometers. On the 28th of January, reconnaissance reported a prisoner of war camp directly in their path, Stalag the 3rd C. Beyrle's camp, the place where he had escaped less than a month earlier. His battalion received orders to liberate it at dawn. The assault began at dawn on January 29th, 1945. Soviet tanks rolled from three directions. Artillery softened the perimeter. The German garrison, outnumbered and outgunned, collapsed within 2 hours. Beyrle entered the camp he had escaped from 3 weeks earlier. The barbed wire was torn apart by tank treads. The guard towers were burning. Prisoners poured out of the barracks, thousands of men unable to comprehend that liberation had arrived. Some of them stared at the American in a Red Army uniform carrying a Soviet submachine gun, shouting in English. The prisoners who recognized him thought they were seeing a ghost. He had escaped in early January. The Germans had reported him killed. Now he was back, liberating the camp that had held him captive. But there was no time for reunions. The battalion had orders to continue west. German forces were regrouping ahead. Beyrle helped organize the evacuation of the sickest prisoners, then climbed back onto his Sherman and rejoined the column. Wounded and meeting A. Marshal. The push continued through the first week of February. Resistance stiffened as the Soviets approached German territory. Luftwaffe aircraft appeared in numbers not seen since the previous summer. The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers were obsolete by 1945 standards. Slow, vulnerable, easy targets for modern fighters. But against ground troops without air cover, they remained deadly. On February 3rd, Beyrle's battalion was advancing through open terrain when the air raid siren sounded. 6 Stukas appeared, diving toward the tank column. Beyrle was 50 meters from his Sherman when the first bomb hit. The explosion threw him sideways. Shrapnel tore through his legs. A second bomb landed closer. The concussion slammed him to the ground. He lay in a crater as the attack continued. The Stukas made 3 passes before Soviet fighters drove them off. When the medics found him, Beyrle was unconscious and bleeding from multiple wounds. His left leg was shattered below the knee. Shrapnel had penetrated his back, arms, and abdomen. The Soviet field surgeons did not expect him to survive the night. They evacuated him to a military hospital in Landsberg and Der Warthe, 60 kilometers behind the front. The facility was overwhelmed. Surgeons worked around the clock. Beyrle survived the first night. His body, hardened by 7 months of captivity, refused to quit. The Soviet doctors operated 3 times in the first week. He was the only non-Soviet patient in the hospital. Word of the American spread through the staff. Eventually, word reached someone with authority to investigate. The most powerful military commander in the Soviet Union wanted to meet the American soldier. Marshal Georgy Zhukov was the most celebrated military commander in Soviet history. He had saved Moscow. He had broken the German siege of Stalingrad. He had crushed the Wehrmacht at Kursk. Now he was leading the final Soviet offensive toward Berlin. Zhukov arrived at Landsberg in mid-February with a small entourage. The hospital commander escorted him through the wards, hundreds of wounded, dozens dying. Beyrle could not stand. He could barely sit upright. But when the most powerful general in the Soviet Union walked through the door, he attempted a salute from his hospital bed. Zhukov stopped the gesture. Through an interpreter, he asked Beyrle to tell his story. All of it, from the beginning. Beyrle spoke for 20 minutes. The D-Day jump, the capture, the 7 camps, the Gestapo torture, the escape through frozen Poland, the month fighting with Soviet tanks, the liberation of his own prison camp, the Stuka attack that nearly killed him. When Beyrle finished, Zhukov was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. The Marshal said he had never heard a story like this. He said Beyrle had earned the respect of the Soviet people. He said the alliance between their nations was built on men like him, soldiers who fought regardless of flags or borders. Then Zhukov asked what Beyrle wanted. He wanted to go home. His family believed he was dead. His mother had mourned him for 8 months. Zhukov solved the problem with a signature. He ordered his staff to prepare official documents identifying Joseph Beyrle as an American soldier under Soviet protection. He authorized travel permits for Moscow. He assigned a military convoy to transport the wounded American. The American resurrection. 3 weeks later, Beyrle was evacuated from Landsberg. His leg had been saved, though he would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. The journey to Moscow took 9 days. In late February 1945, the convoy reached Moscow. Beyrle was delivered to the gates of the American embassy. He was wearing a Soviet uniform. He was carrying Soviet military documents signed by Marshal Zhukov. He was claiming to be a dead American paratrooper. The Marine guards at the gate did not believe a word of it. They detained him immediately. They confiscated his Soviet documents. They photographed him. They asked questions designed to expose inconsistencies. Beyrle answered everything: his serial number, his unit, his commanding officers, the name of the church in Saint-Côme-du-Mont, the date of his capture, the names of the prison camps. The embassy staff remained skeptical. The story was too extraordinary. A paratrooper declared dead on D-Day, captured, tortured, escaped, joining Soviet tanks, wounded in combat, assisted by Marshal Zhukov. It sounded like propaganda. It sounded like fiction. They cabled Washington for verification. The War Department confirmed he had been declared killed in action. A funeral mass had been held. Benefits had been paid. The case was closed. The embassy requested fingerprints. Every American serviceman was fingerprinted during enlistment. The results came back in 48 hours. Perfect match, 10 points of identification on each finger. The man in the Metropole Hotel was exactly who he claimed to be. On April 21st, 1945, Beyrle landed in the United States. He had been gone for 2 years. He had been dead for 10 months. He was 21 years old, walked with a permanent limp, and carried shrapnel fragments in his body that would remain there until he died. 2 weeks later, Germany surrendered. Beyrle celebrated Victory in Europe Day in Chicago. The homecoming in Muskegon was quieter. His mother cried for 3 days. His father said almost nothing. Legacy and honor. The following year, Beyrle married Joanne Hollowell at Holy Trinity Church in Muskegon, the same church that had hosted his funeral mass. The same priest who had prayed for his immortal soul now blessed his marriage. The congregation included neighbors who had attended both services. Beyrle never sought publicity. He worked as a shipping supervisor for 28 years. He raised 3 children. He rarely spoke about the war unless directly asked. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, President Bill Clinton and Russian President Boris Yeltsin held a ceremony at the White House. Beyrle stood in the Rose Garden while 2 presidents pinned medals on his chest. He was the only man in history to receive combat honors from both nations for the same war. His son John watched from the audience. That son would become the United States ambassador to Russia from 2008 to 2012. Joseph Beyrle died on December 12, 2004. He was 81 years old. He passed in his sleep during a visit to Toccoa, Georgia, the same town where he had trained as a paratrooper 62 years earlier. He was buried with full military honors in Arlington National Cemetery. The woman who had saved his life did not survive the war. Alexandra Samusenko was killed on March 3, 1945, less than a month after Beyrle left her battalion. She was 23 years old. She never saw the victory she had fought for. Beyrle spent decades trying to locate her grave to honor the commander who had given him a second chance. He called her a symbol of Soviet courage, a woman who had lost everything and kept fighting. The legacy spread slowly. In 2002, historian Thomas Taylor published The Simple Sounds of Freedom, documenting Beyrle's journey. Exhibitions were shown in Moscow and other Russian cities in 2010. The exhibition traveled to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. His story became a symbol of the extraordinary alliance that defeated fascism. Joseph Beyrle never called himself a hero. He said the real heroes were the men who never came home, the paratroopers who died in Normandy, the prisoners who starved in German camps, the Soviet soldiers who fell by the millions pushing west toward Berlin. He survived through luck, stubbornness, and the kindness of strangers who had no reason to help him. In his humility, he revealed something essential about what made him extraordinary. He had endured the unendurable. He had escaped the inescapable. He had fought on behalf of allies he did not know, in a language he barely spoke, for a cause that was not his own nation's struggle. That is the story of Joseph Beyrle, the only American soldier in the history of the Second World War to serve in combat with both the United States Army and the Soviet Red Army. A man declared dead who became the only living proof that the alliance between our nations was founded on something real, something genuine, something worth remembering. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about paratroopers who refuse to quit, about soldiers who fight against impossible odds, about ordinary people who did extraordinary things when history demanded it. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if someone in your family served. Thank you for making sure Joseph Beyrle does not disappear into silence.